afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Future Proof webcast series. These 50-minute webcasts are designed to be very conversational and interactive. That means we want to get questions from you guys. So if you're out there, if you have questions, be sure to submit them. We will take time at the end of this webinar to make sure we get to those. The goal of the webinar today is to share insight on a range of different aspects of behavioral finance to help you better understand what it is, how it may help improve your practice, and how it may help you communicate better with your clients. So as I said, the title for today is Overcoming Irrational Client Biases Through Behavioral Finance. I'm joined today by my co-host, Blair Duquesne, right? From Ritholtz Wealth Management.
It's Duquesne. Duquesne.
Yeah. And we are excited for our amazing guests that we have for you today. We have Joy Lere. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and co-founder at Shaping Wealth. We also have Justin Castelli. He's a founder and financial advisor at RLS Wealth and the AGC. And our third guest is Morgan Housel, a partner at the Collaborative Fund. Why don't we go ahead, pop up our quick poll that we have for everybody. We'll take a few minutes. But Blair, before we get into that, we have over 550 registered attendees for today's webinar. Why do you think behavioral finance is getting so popular amongst financial advisors?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that it is just now becoming popular, because I think that being a financial advisor and finance in general is really the study of the human condition, right? And so in a lot of ways, we are trying to help our clients do things that are against their natural desires, against their natural tendencies. And whether that's in the front end, saving, budgeting, investing, or on the back end, something that I've been focusing on a lot is convincing clients that they can spend their money. Behavior is probably the most important factor for individuals and families in their success. And so I'm actually shocked it's just getting popular, but I think it's very important and will be in the future.
Yeah, to me, it feels, everybody sort of has their different view, their own behaviors. It feels like being a financial advisor that you just be dealing with such an array of different emotions, behaviors that you would need a tool set to do that. So I agree with you. It does feel a little bit strange that it has taken so long for it to kind of rise in popularity. But maybe Joy, Justin, and Morgan have different views, and maybe we're just late to the game. So we'll find out. But why don't we give folks another couple of seconds here to go ahead and get their responses in, and we'll take a quick look at the results, and then we'll go ahead and we'll dive right into our conversation with Joy. So Paul, if you want to pop up the results, let's see what people think about behavioral finance. So, all right, I like to see this. So 43% are saying I've drunk the Kool-Aid and currently integrate BFI into their practice. But it does look like there's a good percentage that are still curious and want to know more. So that's exactly why we're running these webinars. Yeah. Blair, are you a little surprised by these stats?
Yes and no, right? So if an advisor is already using BFI and they've drunk the Kool-Aid, obviously you wouldn't want to miss this webinar. It's a heavy hitting session with some of the best panelists I could think of to speak on this topic. And so I'm glad that we've got the 18% that are mostly new, because they're going to learn a lot. And I think this is great for everybody. So am I surprised? No, but I'm excited by the mix that we have here.
Absolutely. And with so many people who have drunk the Kool-Aid, I'm expecting some really good questions then for our guests today, because they're already into this. They understand it. So let's make sure that we make sure we got some great questions in there for our guests. So with that, why don't we go ahead? Why don't we jump right into our first guest? Joy, why don't you come on in and we'll go ahead and get started. So Joy, welcome.
Thank you. It is so great to be here with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you, and really, really excited to be picking your brain today.
I can't wait.
So Joy, I'm pretty new to the concept of behavioral finance. I'm definitely probably closer to that 18% than the 43% we saw in the results there. Can you tell us exactly what behavioral finance is? What do advisors sort of typically misunderstand around behavioral finance as well?
Well, let's start with what behavioral finance is. I think it's really having an appreciation that when it comes to understanding people's financial decision-making, that can happen best if we are looking through the lens of psychology, not just math or economic theory. Because when we think about this human experience of money, people's relationship with money is tied to identity. It's about security and safety. It's about power and control. It's about status and significance. It's about legacy. So money is emotional and it's existential. So it's so much more than dollars and cents.
That makes some sense to me. So when I think about that, though, like typically we've always heard, that investing is about math and it is about, having a process, being process driven. Where does, in your mind, behavioral finance sort of sit within that process of investing?
So I think when we think about where behavioral finance sits, for a long time, as BeFi has come onto the scene, I think advisors have kind of treated this as a tool you take off the shelf and you figure out where to fit it in. But Brian Portman and I and our partner Neil at Shaping Wealth, we talk about behavior as gravity. It is everywhere and always. And I think as the industry moves more towards this trend of human-centric advice, this current of behavioral finance, it's not a checkbox that you fit in somewhere with your flow of how you are running clients through a specific path in your business. It is part of everything you are doing. And I'm really excited about what is happening in the industry right now, because I think we are really heading into the second wave of behavioral finance. It's important that we are moving beyond just, cliff notes to thinking fast and slow and nudge and these nice infographics of biases. You asked me, where do advisors go wrong? And I think something that as a clinician, I came into the industry with a clinical background, and I really bristled even sometimes at this word irrational. I think sometimes people approach behavioral finance thinking, okay, well, now I'm learning about this list of biases, and they're treating them as something to diagnose and treat. But really, biases are just kind of these quirks in how all of our brains are wired and how we see the world. We aren't going to get rid of them. I think it's important to recognize, understand them, and address them, and have people in our lives who can help us see our blind spots so we aren't getting in our own way. But it's so important that we aren't pathologizing what is normal behavior. And I think over the last few years, as BeFi has really come onto the scene, there's almost been this idea of, oh, well, biases are causing you to make mistakes. But if an advisor is looking to inspire and empower a client to make better financial decisions, using language that may evoke some shame of, oh, I messed up again, that's not going to usher in a better behavior. So that's where I think when we are thinking about behavioral finance right now, we need to move from the theoretical to more practical. This idea of, well, people are making irrational decisions, to actually starting to normalize that when you're sitting with a client. Because I can tell you as a clinician, when you have enough context of someone's story, you can begin to appreciate that what they are doing in some way, in some situation, probably was adaptive. But what all of us do, sometimes in our financial lives, in our relationship, is we hold on to these old ways of being that helped us survive, but then we outgrow them, or we are in a new context and they kind of expire, but we don't always, our brain doesn't always hit refresh and update that, okay, what I needed to do then is actually not working real well for me now. So I think having that curiosity, that empathy, that perspective taking is so important and really needs to be the focus right now for advisors who are serious about practicing human-centered advice.
So Joy, I'm really interested in what you said about the second wave of BFI. I don't know that I was here for the first wave. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I just didn't get the right training. But what are some examples of concrete ways that advisors can start to build not only how they talk to clients, but their entire processes, their entire practices around these concepts?
Absolutely. So, the first thing I mentioned, that shift from theoretical to practical. Your clients don't want your jargon. So when you're sitting with them, be thinking about what it is like to be in their seat. They don't need to know how smart you think you are. Fancy analytic models aren't going to impress them. Your ability to help them improve their day-to-day lives will. I think really validating and normalizing rather than slapping the label of irrational on whatever someone's choices are is a really important shift. And I think looking at this movement from seeing weakness or mistakes to strength, if we can start to focus on how can we build and support clients to have more financial resilience rather than focusing on what they aren't doing or what they're doing wrong or where they're struggling, is a really important shift as well. And I think there's another important shift that needs to happen, moving from being much more technical and analytical to really leading with empathy. And there's a lot we get wrong about empathy, but I think it, along with storytelling, is the modern advisor's superpower. And empathy is about being able to perspective take of your client, but also it's active. We need to perspective get of the person we're sitting with. And as advisors are sitting with their clients, rather than focusing just on the money, getting really curious about the contextual story. Because it is a financial story that was set in motion long before a client ever found you or had the thought, I should probably work with an advisor, that is influencing the choices that they are making with their money today. So these are some of the trends and some of the focus that I really hope we can begin to see more and more of. And I can tell you, with the advisors that I'm working with that we are training right now, they are eager, they are seeing this kind of shift, rather than, okay, I'm going to take the list of biases off the shelf and check the box. When we are really integrating this much more holistically and thinking about well-being holistically, we're seeing deeper transformation and impact.
Joy, when I think about behavioral finance, and again, admitting that I'm new to the space, like I said, closer to that 18%, you keep mentioning that there's some behaviors in there that clients may not be getting right. To me, the one that pops up is, buying high and selling low, right? Obviously, you want to be doing the opposite of that. What are some of the other, and again, we don't want to call them mistakes now, right? Or things that folks may not be getting right that advisors can maybe help walk them through? Because to me, it feels like that's the biggest part of investing, but it sounds like what you're saying is that, the model and the numbers aren't necessarily the biggest aspect to it. So what are some of those other things that clients may just not be doing perfectly right now that's sort of negatively impacting their finances?
I think one of the greatest things that an advisor can do is come alongside someone and help them build much more of a connection between present self and future self. And I love the work that Hal Hirschfield has done on this area. We treat our future self as an entirely different person, but we are creating the life we will have tomorrow through the decisions we make today. And I think when an advisor can help someone build a bridge between those two things, that's really important. And I think another thing an advisor can do is, we as humans, we aren't real great at balance. We tend to think in extremes, we live in extremes, and that is often to our detriment. So Blair, I love that you brought up, sometimes we talk a lot about, oh, I need to help people save their money. And there's a lot of focus on that aspect of someone's money life. But there are a lot of people who struggle to give themselves permission to spend the money that they do have. So I think there's something else, that a real opportunity for advisors to come alongside of someone and help them balance, okay, how can I savor and enjoy what I have right in front of me? Because that is all any of us are promised. But how can I do that responsibly with an eye and a thought for the life I want to have for myself, for my family down the road? How can I think about the legacy I want to leave even after I'm gone? How can I use my resources to live according to my values?
Joy,
Wow,
so I think
that's trippy. I want to the concept of connecting to your future self, if that can be done without any medications or substances, is very fascinating. I don't want to know what she looks like, but I definitely want to think about that concept more. That's very fascinating, Joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Joy, we've had a couple questions come in for you. So we want to make sure that you stick around, you come back and join us after we're done chatting with Justin and Morgan. So we appreciate the time today. We'll be bringing Joy back on to get to your questions, but I hope everybody took a few lessons from this. I certainly feel like I know a little bit more now about what behavioral finance is and how it may be impacting my behavior. Again, I think I'm probably making too many of those irrational decisions, but Joy, we appreciate the time and we'll see you in about 20 minutes to get to some questions.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy.
Blair, so thinking about your future self, huh? Like that's just a crazy concept to sort of try to connect the decisions I make today with what's impacting tomorrow. Like, how do you say you might need some substances to do that? Is there a way that you could see yourself getting there without the help or aids of substances?
I think just being aware of that concept in general is incredibly helpful. And this is a huge takeaway for me and how I can potentially move that into my practice. I probably need to go through Joy's program at Shaping Wealth, though, is what I'm taking my main takeaway here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a bunch of us could. So Blair, we have a great guest. We got Justin coming on next. Justin, I mean, so many questions for you now after we just went through that, but the one that I want to start with really is like, hey, you're building your practice a bit around this, right? And it's kind of your calling card. What got you into it? Sort of what made you kind of get to the path? You're like, this is what I kind of want to build my practice on. And I think this is the right call for me to connect with my clients.
Yeah, it's been a progression. And you have me back on another talk. I'll talk to Blair about getting that future self coming today and how you might be able to do that without the other drugs and stuff out there. But for me, when it comes to behavioral finance, like it was something that was always just natural to me, and it's been a progression. So it's been really over the last 8 years of running my firm where I've been able to have the freedom to explore it more and go down the path. But it just started with going down the planning process with clients and really being inquisitive about why they wanted the things they said they wanted and just asking questions, why, and then realizing they were telling me one story, yet they were doing a completely other. And I knew there had to be some disconnect and why is that happening? So it's just a little bit of like doing a little research on my own. And then I got my SEMA designation. I forget when that was. And one of the books, a part of the curriculum, was a behavioral finance book. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of the term. And I really enjoyed the book because it allowed me to get a better understanding of some of these biases that I was experiencing with clients, but I didn't even know that they were a thing. I noticed and observed them, but I didn't know there was an actual name for it and there was a reason for it happening. And what I realized is that if I could better understand why my clients move the way they do when it comes to their finances and creating their life, then I would be able to do a better job of crafting a plan that they might actually stick with. And I used to always tell them, I said, I can create this beautiful plan on spreadsheets and in the software, but if you're not going to follow it, it's worthless. And what prevents a lot of times from a plan being executed and followed is these biases that people don't know they're suffering from, that they say they want one thing, but they'll never be able to do it because it just doesn't align with how they're wired.
Justin, what do you do with clients who can't connect with their goals or what they're trying to accomplish? I encounter this all the time where a client may come back and say, well, my goal is to have more money. Do you have any, firsthand experiences of how you've helped someone come around to figuring out what are they really trying to accomplish with this money?
As you probably know, Blair, most clients don't, when they first come meet with us, they don't know what they really want. They just know the things they've been told they're supposed to want. I want to retire. I want to put my kids through college. I want to buy a house. These are things we're told we're supposed to want, but we don't really know why. So there's no connection to it that really motivates us to do the things we need to do. So I think in that situation where they're not connecting with their goals, you've got to help them uncover why they want that goal. And you've got to ask why more than once. You've got to peel back the layers of the onion to help them figure out, well, why do you want that goal? And a lot of times what you'll find out is they don't even really want that goal. I don't want to retire at 65. That's just what I thought I was supposed to do. I'd rather, work till 55 and then go do this for 10 more years. Well, great. Now we know. And why do you want that? And here's the reasons why. My grandfather died when he was 62. I don't know if I'd make it to 65. Great. Now we have emotion attached to the goals rather than this is what you're supposed to do. And now I have enough to motivate you to do the things that are going to get you to that, because there's something there that means more than this is just what I'm supposed to do.
Justin, that's really interesting that you bring up sort of the constructs a little bit of society, right? That like, hey, you want to retire, you want to own a home and those sort of things. And those are just sort of things people are told that they don't have an emotional attachment to. How do you, besides just asking why, how do you dig into that emotion? Like, how do you get that out of them? There's got to be more to it than just asking them why.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of George Kinder and the life planning process. I don't have the designation yet, but that's my 2024 plan. And he has these 3 great questions that you can read about in his books. They're highly published. And I took those and kind of made them my own. They're not too different from his, but I go through these questions and they all center around our mortality. And the last question that I end with is asking them, what if today was your last day, what would you regret? Who did you not become? Where did you not get to go? What did you not get to do? And when you think about if today was my last day, and if they're really committed to the process and being honest, you start to really get to know more about them and what's more important. And I think one of the greatest skills we can have as an advisor, and I think I was born with this skill, is the ability to listen and then be able to read cues, whether it's the verbal cues or the silent cues that people put out there, to know where we need to push harder or dig deeper, and when they're just giving us a surface level answer. So it's a lot of soft skills that come with it, and then just not being willing to settle for a quick answer and then move on to the next thing. You've got to really commit to the process and be okay as an advisor, spending a lot of time with your clients and maybe never even talking about the numbers, because I really think you have to get to the root of what it is they want, understanding their why and helping them understand that before you get to it. So it's questions and patience.
Patience
Justin,
is not something I have.
What would you say to those curious folks, the 18% who are probably at this point going, wait a minute, this is not what my job is at all. My job is to invest people's money and do a financial plan. Like, where does somebody even start on that journey? I often say, I feel like an untrained therapist. How does someone make that leap from, I do numbers and math and have all the jargon, to actually sitting down and having long conversations with clients about their hopes and dreams?
I think there's space everywhere for all advisors. So I think for some advisors, that they don't want to get there and that's not their strength, there will be plenty of clients that they don't want to go to these depths. Like, you can try and try and try, but unless somebody really is open to figuring this out and they want to, you can't force them to figure out what they want. So I think there could still be a need for them, but let's say you want to make that conversion over this way. I think it just starts simple and just say, hey, talking to your clients, hey, we've been working together for a while. I have a good idea of where your goals are, but I really want to know more about why you want those goals. And just start with like 1 or 2 deeper level questions, and just start slow and add 1 or 2 new questions every time you see them in review, getting more and more deeper to who they are. And even beyond their goals, just why do they do the things they do? What is most important to them? Understand their values, And then once you get comfortable doing that, it becomes easier. It's just like anything. The more reps you have asking these questions, sitting there quietly, I'm horrible when it comes to silence in most situations, but when it comes to this part of working with my clients, I'll sit there all day and just give them the space to think about it and come up with the answer. You don't want to be the first one to speak in that situation. You want them to answer first, because then you win that little battle. But I think it just starts small. Find one or two questions, whether they're your own or another advisor's, and start implementing those and getting comfortable with going that deep. And I think it becomes a lot easier from there.
That's a great answer. We actually have a comment coming in, Justin, that's almost spot on to what you're talking about and being patient. So Drew asked the question of, sometimes those can be difficult questions that you're asking of clients, and they might not be comfortable to answer them on the spot. Do you, as practice, sort of give them the questions in advance so that they know what they're getting when they come in? Does it work better to just sort of not spring it on them, but just ask them on the spot? Because sometimes when you do, like, someone, oh, what is your passion? Or what do you want to do? Like, all of a sudden people, their mind just goes blank. So how do you kind of set clients up for those questions?
Drew, that's a great question. I think the purist would say you don't give them a heads up and you wait and get the most authentic answer when you ask them in the moment. But I don't think everybody knows the answer truly, and they're just going to skip over it with the pressure on them first time hearing it. So we actually, as a part of our onboarding process, we have like a workflow in our email campaigns, and the email that goes out a week before the meeting for a first meeting has those 3 questions in it, and just says, hey, I'm going to want to have this discussion with you. We're going to hit on these 3 questions. So, think about them between now and then and come prepared. And I've had a few clients actually type out their responses and send it to me before they come in, which was really cool, because then I knew they were excited and they really wanted to go down this level. But I do think that there's a benefit to giving it to them ahead of time, to give them more time to think about it. I think you're going to get a little bit more thought than if you just surprise them with it.
Sounds like it's a bit of a process there for you. Like you said, it's part of a workflow. This is integrated now into everything you're doing within your practice. This isn't just like, I'm going to have a first meeting and ask a couple of questions and then go off and do something. Does this kind of run like a sort of connective tissue across everything you do in your practice, even after you've had a client for 5-10 years?
Yeah. So I'm in an interesting position because I wasn't as far into life planning or trying to do so when I started my firm. So my clients who came to me didn't come to me looking for an advisor that was going to get deep with them and emotional. And over the years, we've slowly done it as I've grown to learn how to do it, and they've gotten comfortable with it. So I always ask them, what are you not doing that you wish you were? And that usually takes us down the path. So I do believe that life planning or connected ways of doing life planning is the future of the majority of what we're going to be doing for our clients. So it is a big part. And I just launched a new relationship that, in full disclosure, no one has asked for, no one has signed up for, but it's really, really intense. And it's more along the lines of life designing and kind of coaching than it is the financial planning component of it. So I am a big believer in going to these depths, really getting to understand our clients, figuring out what it is they want to live, helping them find their authentic life, and then building the numbers to that plan. And you can't figure out the life that a client really wants to live without understanding their why, and then understanding what are the biases that they're coming to. Joy talked about basically our money stories, what we come with to the table, the way we view money. As an advisor, I have to understand that, because it is very hard to change somebody's money story. Blair talked about having her clients spend money and giving them the okay to do so. Same thing with me, but you have clients who for 30 years, 35 years, live below their means, save. You can't turn that switch off and all of a sudden go into spend mode. Like, that's part of their DNA, and it takes time to get over that. So if I know that's how they are, there's little things that I can do in our meetings or tasks I give them to be able to get them to move forward and get comfortable doing it. So you've got to understand their why, but you also have to understand what are the biases that they're suffering from to be able to help them. And I don't think the answer is to say, oh, that's recency bias, or that is, that's you're anchoring to this last return. They don't care about that. I think there's an opportunity to educate your clients through creating content and things along those lines, so they can read it and connect it on their own. But in the moment, you don't want to tell them what they're suffering from. You want to be able to identify it and then know them well enough that you can help them navigate through it, and not necessarily like tell them, hey, you're dumb for doing this. This is stupid. It's identifying it and helping them work through it.
Justin, we have a bunch of questions. Oh, go ahead, Blair. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask, do you think that financial advisors themselves need to be seeing therapists regularly? That's a question that's been in my head lately.
I don't think it'd be a bad thing. I do think financial advisors should understand their own biases, because we bring our, we're supposed to be removed from the client's plan and not put our own influences on it, but we're humans. So understanding our own biases to make sure we don't place those on our clients as well. So I would imagine that would be a good practice for advisors to have.
Absolutely. Justin, like I was saying, we have a ton of questions coming in. So make sure you stick around. But we want to go ahead. We want to bring Morgan Housel in now to get a sense of sort of what the actual client is thinking about. So we'll see Justin back here in about 10 minutes or so. So Morgan, Justin kind of just teed this up perfectly for me without even knowing. He just talked about recency biases. If we think about SVB, and '08 in the financial crisis, in your book, you talk about how the environment and what's going on can impact people's view on money. Do you think we're going to have folks that are more suspicious around investing now and less trustworthy of financial institutions and maybe less trustworthy of going to a Blair or a Justin to run their money for them?
I think it's less about, did you experience SVB in the last week and like what your personal experience with that was. It's more about like the multiple times you experience these events. So I think for a lot of people after 2008, it was easy to say, oh, that was terrible. That was bad, but that was a once in a century experience. It's not going to happen again. That was a one-off. And then after everything kind of collapsed in 2020 and the early days of the COVID lockdowns and like millions of people lost their jobs, I think a lot of people after that said maybe 2008 was not a one-off. Maybe every 10 years, the world kind of breaks. And this is what I should expect going forward, that the economy is much more fragile than I once thought that it was, which is honestly a pretty good like realization to have. But I think it's similar to the generation that lived through the Great Depression. And then the very moment that was over, they got thrust into World War II. That was it. It wasn't just the Great Depression. It was the combination of those events that left them with this idea that everything can fall apart at a moment's notice. So it's less about just 2008, just COVID, just SVB. It's like, if you experience those a couple times, it's like fool me once kind of thing. But if you experience them, 2-3 times, then it really sticks with you for the long run.
Yeah, that makes
totally
makes a ton
resonate
of
with
sense.
that. I totally resonate with that. I know that I will forever be marked by 2008 and COVID. And I think that, sort of rushing to look for where cash was for clients earlier this week sort of had that. So do you think, because I've spoken to children of Great Depression babies who still carry on those biases and tendencies, do you think that means that this will last with us for generations?
Well, I think it scars people very differently. What was so interesting about the Great Depression is that it impacted nearly everybody financially, from the poorest to the richest. Everyone was smashed to pieces in the 1930s. COVID, in the early days of COVID, was almost the opposite. It was so bifurcated. Whereas if you owned a dry cleaning store, your business went to zero. If you were a tech worker, it was better than it had ever been. You were making more money than you ever had. You were more in demand than ever. So that just like black and white nature of what COVID was economically, left people scarred in very different ways. And I would say, like, this is probably wrong. I'm probably exaggerating this, but I think for half the economy, COVID was worse than the Great Depression. And for the other half, it was literally the most prosperous times they had ever been in at the same exact time that was going on. I don't think there's ever been a period that was that just like dramatically bifurcated that we've ever had than 2020 and 2021. And so some people, the scars, so to speak, that they have from COVID is like, oh, it was great. You should take a lot of risk and buy junk tech stocks and buy bankrupt penny stocks because that's what worked for them. And for other people, it's like they're going to leave more scarred than they have ever been, and probably even more scarred than people were during the Great Depression. It was so impactful. If you owned a service business in 2020 and everything went to zero. So I think it just scars people in a very different way. And in a way that I don't think we've ever experienced. The Great Depression, you could say like, oh, it was bad for everyone. And even like after 9/11 and after 2008, it impacted everyone in similar ways. COVID was just so different for everybody.
So Morgan, you talk about scars and people having, different, reactions or different views on things. Are there ways that they can work through those scars? Do they stay with them forever? Like, hey, if you went through COVID and you had that dry cleaning business and it went to zero, do you ever get over that? Like, is there a way to work through these scars?
I think the answer to both questions is no. I think that's the practical reality. I would love if it was not the case. I would love it if it was like, oh, we are all prisoners to our past, but here's how you can get around that. I really don't think it's the case that every single person, whether they know it or not, is a product of their past, because nothing is more persuasive to you than what you've experienced firsthand. You can try to empathize with other people's experiences and say, oh, let me today try to think about what it was like during the Great Depression or during World War II or during this thing that I can read about and try to put myself in their shoes. But there's not going to be the emotional scar tissue that sticks around that there is with someone who actually experienced that firsthand. It's like, everybody agrees that, drunk driving is bad and it shouldn't, and that we should do something about it. That's not controversial in the slightest. But until you've lost a family member to a drunk driver, you're not going to have the ability and the willingness to really go out with a picket on the street and fight for something. So it's not until you've experienced it firsthand that your motivation to do something about it and your willingness to remember it, really goes to the next level.
It's interesting that you say that, where so much of the world now is online and we're not having firsthand experiences, but we're experiencing everything in a very shallow, way more experiences in a very shallow manner. Have you given any thought to the fact that there might not be, or how our brains will change based on the fact that things are no longer IRL, and that we're kind of sort of watering down those firsthand experiences?
Yeah, two parts to this that I think are really important. One is that everybody measures their financial well-being relative to other people. There's no such thing as an abject level of wealth. Everything is just how much do I have relative to this person that I'm looking at. And for most of history, until 10 years ago, the people around you that you were comparing yourself to were your coworkers, your neighbors, your siblings, the people who you saw every day. And you could still compare yourself to them. And maybe you had some coworkers who were doing much better than you. So you felt some sort of you were falling behind. Today, though, it's the people around you is a curated list on Instagram of people who are just giving you the highlight reels of their life and whose photos are literally airbrushed to make it look way better than they actually is. And so now everyone around you, it's not only millions of strangers, it's the highlight reels of those strangers' lives. So it just makes it so that it is so much easier for your expectations to spin out of control today than it was even 10 years ago. And the way to really quantify the impact this has on people is probably the most underrated news story in America right now. It's not really a secret anymore, but the massive decline in teenage mental health that has corresponded very directly with the rise in social media use, particularly for teenage girls, where depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts has just exploded in the last 10 years. And the people who've tied this directly back, not just correlation, but causation to social media. If you ask me, I think the root of that is just social media makes the comparison game and the expectation game just it's a completely different dimension than it's ever been. All well-being has always been tied to comparison, but the comparisons now are just in a different universe than they used to be. That's one of it. The other thing, tying it to the news in the last week, someone brought this up yesterday. I thought it was a really good point, but it was that there is not a single other bank in America that could have experienced what Silicon Valley Bank did, because virtually all of their customers are homogenous. They're all tech people who live in the same county. And therefore, a lot of those people were literally on the same chat groups. They were so connected to each other that as soon as one person yelled fire, everyone else around it heard it and everyone else reacted instantaneously. So they lose a quarter of their deposits in one day. It would be so difficult to pull that off at Citigroup or Bank of America, where the customers are not homogenous. So I think the more tightly interconnected these groups are, the more herd behavior is just way more potent than it ever has been.
Morgan, you talked about people sort of being, kind of scarred from their past, and Joy was talking about people having to think about their future self and setting the right process up for there. Do you have an answer of how people might be able to connect those two and maybe think about those scars that then use that to help them make better decisions for their future self?
I don't see, it's on one hand, I would say, hey, the people who lived through the Great Depression, who were scared of debt and scared of taking risk, on some hand, that might be great. There's I would compare it to the generation who did not go through that. Were probably more susceptible to going bankrupt. more susceptible to taking on too much risk and too much debt. So there's some sense of it where it's like being scarred by your bad experience is a great thing to learn from it and not do it ever again. The problem is that you're probably going to anchor to that bad experience as what the next risk is going to be. So if you lived through 2008, as a lot of us did, we probably became like very, aware and scared of like investment banks holding sketchy mortgage debt. That was the lesson that we took away from it, a very hyper-specific kind of risk. But the risk that was actually going to impact us during the 2010s was not subprime mortgage bonds. It was a viral illness that was going to impact everyone. Like the next risk is never the same as the last risk was. So I think on one hand, it's great to learn from your mistakes. It just makes you heavily anchor on that mistake as what you think the next risk is going to be that comes afterwards. So it's always just fighting the last war.
Again, Morgan, I think we could go on for hours and hours with you here, but we've got a bunch of questions and we're almost out of time. I'd love to bring Joy and Justin back in. And I think we'll keep this one going here because we have a question here from Chris. It says, social media is amplifying our collective sense of investing FOMO. It's why everyone thinks they can get rich overnight, but what can we do about it from here? So Joy, maybe you take that from more of the sort of clinical perspective, and then Justin, we'll go to you, maybe thinking about it from the advisor perspective on how we can help folks through sort of managing this investing FOMO.
I think when it comes to social media, it's so important for all of us to remember that we are comparing our private pain to other people's very curated public-facing facades. So when you are looking at whatever you are seeing on your feed, knowing that you are not getting a complete picture. And so I think that is a really important place to start.
Justin, and your thoughts from the sort of managing, clients' expectations and things like that?
I would first ask them how this helps them accomplish their goal. How does this fit into the plan that we've laid out? And if they don't have a good reason, I think that makes it a lot easier to push it away. And then if they can somehow work it in, then start talking about the risk side of things. And then going back to history and finding some examples of where, YOLOing on some crypto is probably not the best thing. And reminding them of that emotional why that we're planning for and say, are you willing to risk that for this? And I think that would kind of calm those conversations down a little bit.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to the TikTok video from 2021. I just buy stocks when they're going up and then I sell them when they stop going up. It's very dangerous to both fear and greed, right? It's two sides of the same sword.
And Morgan, I just want to get a quick perspective from you on this because you alluded to the impacts of social media that it could have. Do you think it's, creating a FOMO? Do you think it's creating like more of this, like I'm not as good as everybody, or I don't have what they have? And maybe that is the same thing as FOMO, but do you think it's actually creating bad behavior around investing?
I think it's definitely leading to it. There's a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt who phrased this really well. He said, people do not communicate on social media, they perform for one another. But it's really hard to understand that. It's easy to assume that what you are reading on Twitter or Instagram is just like the random full thoughts of what people are thinking at that time. So to state like the plainly obvious, nobody is going onto TikTok and making a video about the money that they lost all the time. It's always highlighting the wins and whatnot. So to the extent that creates FOMO, of course. The other thing is that for most of history, where most people got their financial information were like established media sources that were like of various quality, but at least there was some sense of like fact checking and dignity that went into it. Whereas in a TikTok video, a lot of those people who said, I just made $1 million, they're just completely pulling that out of their rear end. It's just completely a made up thing. They're doing it for a social status. And so that just, it's a different layer of influence than it used to be. Because so many, particularly young people who are just getting into the investing, they're not reading the established sources, they're not reading Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. They're getting everything from TikTok, where the goal on TikTok is just to get as many views as you can, as many retweets as you can, as many shares as you can. So it's a big problem. I mean, I'm a big fan of social media in general, but there are ways where it's used as a weapon. And I think where I've seen it used as a weapon, like most often, and this is my own field, of course, is in money and in investing.
So you're telling me not all of those videos have my best interest at heart when it comes to investing on TikTok?
Shocker, right?
Yeah, shocker. So we have a very specific question. I think this one probably is more geared towards you, Justin, but certainly Blair, if you want to jump in afterwards, or Joy as well. It's assuming we have great discussions around our clients' goals and their values. How important is it to actually document those values and deeper goals and keep it in front of clients?
I think it's a really good practice because it just refocuses them on what their why is and why they're planning and what they're going after. So I have, not all my clients have done it, but I've asked them to create a mission statement for their financial plan. And on the one-page document I give them at every meeting we update, it's supposed to be up there at the front so that whenever we're looking at their portfolio and their goals and everything, that's front and center of this is our why. So I try to keep that in front of them. So I do think it's important, but it is also hard that how do you keep it in front of them throughout the year when you're only seeing them, 2-3 times? You can't remind them through email every week if you have an email newsletter going out. So it is a little bit harder to do that. But I think in every opportunity you have when you're talking to them, especially in the review meetings, to bring those things back up and make sure those are the same goals that they want and keep those values in front of them just to keep them from maybe being distracted and pulled away from it.
Joy, to that, like, would you say that's a good technique for folks to just keep seeing it over and over again and kind of just make it muscle memory?
I do think when, as much as you can be bringing that back to the center of conversations, I think that's really useful. I think when it comes to values, it is very easy for when you ask someone, well, what are your values, to say these very things that sound very socially desirable. Well, I value my family and my health. And well, it's my job to push and challenge people into sometimes a more uncomfortable place because that's the space where we grow. Then I encourage them to look at your behavior. And I say, if someone was just looking at your life right now, if they were looking at your bank account, if they were looking at your calendar, what would they say your values are? And I think sometimes there can be a discrepancy, and that's uncomfortable for people to look at. But if they are really committed to growth, to becoming the best version of themselves, there's a real opportunity for us to compassionately come alongside of them and point out that disconnect, be curious with them about it, not accusing, not shaming, but curious and empathic, and then help them build a bridge from where they are to where they want to go.
Makes sense. So we have time for about one more question. And Morgan, maybe this one is good for you here. And it's, and again, anyone can feel free to jump in with some thoughts afterwards. But, someone comes with an irrational worry, like collapse of the US dollar or a debt ceiling. Like, are there things that we can do to help people sort of understand that things are irrational around money and that they just may be overreacting, or does that sort of send them in a further tailspin? Like, how do you kind of balance that idea of the psychology of money, like your book says, with like irrational fears of things that are probably not going to happen?
I think it's always a hard balance between things that are probably not going to happen, whereas things that if they do happen are going to be catastrophic to you. So if it's the Russian roulette problem. If it's, if there's only a 10% chance of this happening, it's probably not going to happen. But if it actually happens, it's going to ruin you. So there's some times where I think that kind of like worrying about the big risk is actually like, that's actually like somewhat rational to do. Now, some of those risks are not really grounded in a lot of facts and whatnot about how these things are going to play out. But I think it's true for most in money and investing that to do well over time, you don't need to make a lot of great decisions. You don't need to be the best stock picker. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to avoid catastrophe for a long period of time. So in that sense, I almost think it is the right thing, is like to worry about how to avoid the big mega risks. Now, there are people who get too obsessed with it and they are never going to, because they are so pessimistic about what's going to happen next, they don't have the kind of investments that are going to necessarily grow over time. So to me, it's always been about saving like a pessimist and saving like the world, like there's like the future is going to be a continuous chain of problems and setbacks that you need to endure and survive, but simultaneously investing like an optimist with the idea that if you can actually endure those big risks and stick around for long enough, it's going to pay off and be worth it over time. So I think having that like barbell personality with these things is kind of the balance to it.
Awesome. Justin, you had something to say there? It looked like you were about to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick from a practitioner standpoint, I think the way you address that and handle it first is not to shoot down their worry and tell them they're silly for worrying about it. It's to empathize with them and say, okay, I understand you have concerns. Tell me why. What are you concerned about? And get more to the root of why they're concerned. And then I think once they feel and they see they've been heard, like the concern comes down, and then you can begin to educate them on how maybe you shouldn't be concerned about that, or if that does happen, there's no solution to it. Like if all the markets crash, it doesn't matter where your money is because everything's gone. So do we really need to worry about that? But I think the biggest thing is not to jump and try to make them feel silly for their fears. It's to empathize, understand it, and then begin to slowly walk them down. And sometimes you have to budge a little bit and maybe give them a little bit of leeway to do something to give them some more comfort. So maybe they want to go all to cash. Okay, let's not go all to cash. Let's put 25% into cash just to make them feel easier and get through the moment. So that you've allowed them to stick with the plan and not do something too rash, but you also haven't done something for the long run isn't the right thing.
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank Joy, Justin, and Morgan for their time. Absolutely, Blair. It's been a pleasure hosting this webinar with you. I want to leave with one question for you, Blair. As a practitioner now, everything that you've heard today from these three experts, what do you feel like you're going to change and do differently tomorrow when you sit down at your desk?
Oh, I'm going to try to connect with my future self. And then I'm going to try to help my clients do that. I think that's a huge takeaway for me. But I feel like this entire discussion has been so beneficial. I'm going to let it soak in. And I hope that everybody else feels the same. This was an incredible amount of information. I just want to thank everybody, all of our panelists, for participating.
Yeah, our chat has been blowing up here in the webinar. The number of questions that come in are like record setting for us and doing these sort of things. So again, a huge thank you to our guests. We'll be back next month. We'll be talking about M&A activity in the RA industry and the financial advisory practice. So maybe not as exciting as today's, but certainly something that we're seeing more and more of within the industry. And a lot of advisors have a lot of interest in that. So we'll have another set of three amazing guests. And Blair, maybe it'd be you that's hosting with me, but I'm sure we'll have someone from your side join us as well. But we'll be back. I think it's April 19th or April 20th for that next webinar. But again, thank you to Morgan, Justin, Joy, and thank you to everybody that joined us today.